fine. Yep. Great. So on my screen, all I have is me right now, just so that you know. Um, so welcome. This talk is called Impact Projects, How to Stand Out During the Admissions Process. I'm Dr. P. I'm the president and founder of Crimson Coaching, and which provides academic tutoring, test prep, and college consulting to students worldwide. I started out as a teacher, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about during this particular talk. I began working one-on-one with students and families in 2014 when I founded Crimson Coaching, just so that I could do things like mentor impact projects, which I will talk more about during this talk. A lot of people ask me why Crimson Coaching, and I name my company that because, as you could see from the color of the mats of the photo and diploma behind me, it's the color of my alma mater, Harvard. And I developed this talk because one of the most frequent questions that I get asked as a college counselor is, what can my child do to stand out during the admissions process? And I would say, other than getting really great grades, impact projects are probably the next best thing a student can do. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic tonight. And this also happens to be the very first time that I'm delivering this talk. So I'm delighted that you're here. I'll talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and I will try to monitor the chat as best I can. If you don't get your question answered right away, don't worry about it. It's all good. I will get to you at the end when we'll do a Q&A. But for the duration of the talk, if you could please keep yourself muted so that the distractions are limited. But before we go on, I do just want to thank you all for listening, whether you're listening live in your home or later on, to Kim Carletta, the young adult librarian who has invited me here, and to Orange Public Library for sponsoring this talk. So first, I just want to give you an idea of the sources that I'm using. As a trained historian, I always like people to know where my sources are coming from. So the first one is personal. I was at the 25th reunion of my graduating class in 2018. And at Harvard, that happens to be where I live. That was my dorm. And so some of these words of wisdom come from the undergraduate director of admissions, William Fitzsimmons. A lot of the talk comes from my professional experience as a teacher. This happens to be Great Neck North Senior High School, where I began my teaching career in 1997. Also, I taught at Scarsdale High School in Westchester. That's where I ended my full-time teaching career in 2014. And the place that I taught for the most amount of years was Horace Mann School, an independent day school in Riverdale, New York. But of course, since 2014, I've also been working one-on-one with students, sometimes on mentoring them through their research and impact projects. And I'll be talking about some of them later today. And then, of course, I also will rely upon some of the latest research from journalists like Jeffrey Salingo, as well as Ron Lieber. So that's where all of this is coming from. So just a little, I like to define my terms. Maybe some of you have never heard of an impact project before, and that's totally understandable. So I define an impact project as an extracurricular activity that demonstrates a student's ability to be self-directed and take initiative. And sometimes you will hear the term entrepreneurial used by other college consulting companies. And that's a fine word, but I feel like that word also has the connotation of business. And I would prefer not to use that because you don't need to start a business, right? You don't need to start the next Google 2.0 or whatever in order to develop an impact project. You really just need to show that you can be self-directed. Very importantly, an impact project should emerge from a student's own authentic passion. And so you don't want to kind of say, well, what do I think the hot thing is to do right now? Or what is my friend doing? What did this other person who got accepted to Brown or wherever I want to go, what did they do last year? And then just, copy that. You definitely want to look inside yourself and say, what really impassions me, and try to follow that. Sometimes impact projects are long-term, more than one school year, and I will be talking about some of those, but not always. Sometimes they last for just a school year, and then other times they can actually be very short-term, as you'll see from another example I'll discuss. They are often conducted independently, meaning outside of a school's organized extracurricular activities. Okay, so it's not necessarily through joining Habitat for Humanity at your school, although of course such work would have impact. So I don't want to take away from an organized extracurricular activities import. It's just that impact projects are more often started from a student alone. Okay, but they're not working necessarily alone, as you'll see in some of the impact projects that I'm going to talk about. And most importantly, the impact projects that are successful will showcase a student's problem-solving abilities, creative thinking, and maturity, and how those things evolved over the course of the impact project. So just a note, many students need to make contributions to either their family income by working, or while their parents work, to childcare and taking care of their younger siblings. And one could also argue in say a college essay that their impact project was making an impact on their family. And so I don't want to discount the needs that students from lower income families might have. You can certainly consider that your impact project. So a lot of times people, I think they hear impact projects and they think community service. I would just like to make a couple of distinctions though, between what most of us think of as community service and impact projects. So community service is an activity usually organized and led by adults, either at the school, a religious organization, a charitable organization like Habitat for Humanity and whatnot. On the other hand, an impact project originates from and is led by a student, him or herself. Community service activities, the work of that organization will also usually continue beyond the involvement of the student, whereas an impact project would probably cease to exist without the leadership and direction of the student whose impact project it is. But I do want to stress that very often impact projects serve a need in the students' community. And we're going to look at several of those types right now. Now, I want to just be clear, this student who we're going to watch a very short clip on YouTube, I did not mentor this student for this impact project. However, he was an SAT student of mine, which is how I know that he did this the year after we worked on his SAT together. And this is just a very brief example of a short-term impact project.
Now, New York's #1 news. Channel 7 Eyewitness News. The numbers in Westchester County, and tonight they're reporting more than 24,000 confirmed cases with 776 deaths. The hospital in White Plains now equipped with 100 new medical face shields. Thanks to that teenager with a 3D printer, 17-year-old Arjun Dayal, donated the homemade shields this afternoon to White Plains Hospital. The masks, critical personal protection equipment for workers on the front lines, as we know. Dayal says he's fighting the COVID-19 pandemic one mask at a time.
I know that these will go to help to many doctors, nurses, and techs on the floor who are doing the jobs that they need to do, and it's so important for our community. So to be able to help with any way I and my friends can, it's really been a pleasure to work with all of these hospitals, including White Plains Hospital.
What a magnificent attitude. Arjun plans, he says, to donate 3D printed face shields to hospitals across our region and across the country. What a great job.
So, I mean, that is literally, I hope I can get, okay, so that is just one example of an impact project. Now, clearly, you don't need to make the 11 o'clock news in order to have an awesome impact project, and you don't even need a 3D printer to develop an impact project. Another young lady I worked with, I was not her mentor on this. I worked with her on her college essay, which is how I found out about her work on this. During the pandemic, she started a TikTok. I did not know that she was charging for it. I thought it was volunteer, but that doesn't make it any less impressive, where she gave AP US history, physics, and pre-calculus review sessions to students. And you can see, you know, she's got over 18,000 followers. It was quite an impressive feat that she did during, this was primarily, I believe, during the spring of 2021. And I should mention that Arjun, who did the face mask, that was in the spring of 2020, right? So he was responding to an immediate need. Sadie met the immediate need of other students who might have been learning from home, trying to pass various tests, and she helped out thousands of students through her TikTok. Another student whom I did mentor did his impact project through the organization of the Eagle Scout. But if you know anything about Eagle Scouts, you'll know that, you know, the Eagle Scouts are not telling the Scouts exactly what to do, how to get from point A to point Z, right? They really need to figure that out himself. And so it was Ward's dream to build outdoor fitness stations outside of his high school at Scarsdale. And he started this when he was a sophomore. That's when I was his mentor, and we were working together about once a week or so online, and we would work together on who he needed to call, what, you know, resources he needed to muster in order to make his presentations. And finally, you know, 2 years later, he got this project done. So, you know, the Girl Scouts also have Gold Scout projects, which are similar to the Eagle Scout. So that would also count as an impact project. So as you can see, these three examples have in common that they grew out of students' authentic passions. Sophie's, Sadie's for history, Ward's for fitness, and Arjun's for technology and medicine. They all met a need in their community, whether that community was in physical space or in the virtual space, right? Sadie's was the other community of students studying those subjects around the country. And in the case of Sadie and Arjun, they did not allow COVID to stymie their vision. In fact, they took advantage of the needs that COVID brought up or highlighted in their community. So Ward finished his prior to the emergence of COVID-19, but, you know, Arjun was responding to a direct need brought by COVID for face masks. And CD's was kind of an indirect need brought by COVID, right? The fact that many students were learning from home meant that they had a tough time mastering these really difficult subjects, APUSH, physics, and pre-calculus. And she used the internet and kind of took advantage of the fact that everybody was already online in order to make these TikTok review sessions be really successful. So these are students who are not sitting back and saying, oh, I can't do any extracurriculars because of COVID, right? And I have to say, in other talks and from other students, I've often heard that lament. And my retort is always, COVID should not be stopping you. Can you do the same things in the same way that you did before? Of course not, right? And for instance, had Ward tried to do his project during COVID, it might have been very different. He enlisted other Eagle Scouts to help him build those stations there. He probably wouldn't have been able to do that at the height of COVID, right? But nevertheless, these students found ways around COVID, or they kind of took COVID and ran with it and said, I am going to take advantage of the opportunities that COVID has raised. So I think that that's a really important thing to just state before we go any further. So how can you find ideas for your impact project? So I have a list of questions. And by the way, if you're interested, you don't need to worry about taking notes. I actually have a little handout that if you email me later on, I will send to you with a PDF that has lots of these ideas on there. But, the first thing that I think you need to think about is look inside yourself and say, what interests me, right? I don't know. So for instance, I'm looking at even at myself. I am really interested in open water swimming and salsa dancing. So maybe I would try to find some sort of thing I could do that. Maybe I would have done, if I were a kid, open water swimming for charity or something like that. Also look around your community and say, what does my community not have and what does my community need? Another, I also love to hike, and I was hiking near my home on Long Island recently, and I noticed that there was a QR code, the type that you can scan with your camera, and it brought up a map of the hiking trails. And this was a Gold Scout project. So a girl similar to the Eagle Scout, but for a girl. And she had mapped the entire trail, put it online, had the QR code. So now that people, when people hike at this county park, they know where they're going, which is awesome. She looked around her community and said, there's no trail map for this trail. I want to do that. And so, I mean, it doesn't need to be something super high tech, although, there was a little bit of technology involved in that. But she saw something her community needed and met that need. If you really don't know what your community might need, you might want to check out the UN's list of 17 sustainable development goals, and maybe just pick one and figure out how you could bring that sustainable goal to your community. And by the way, I'm sure that there are lots of other nonprofit or non-governmental organization websites that you could go on and try to figure out what are their goals. So maybe, you might want to figure out something that's really near and dear to your heart. So for example, if, fighting domestic violence is something that you feel passionate about, find an organization website and see how you might kind of help meet a need in that community. You also might want to poll and enlist your friends, right? Because for lots of these projects, you couldn't do this alone. Arjun mentioned that he and his friends were making those face masks, right? Ward got friends to help him build those fitness stations, right? So by asking your friends also what they're interested in, it doesn't mean that it's bad for colleges that you've got other people to help you. In fact, it's really great because it shows not only that you can take initiative, but also that you are a leader in your community and you can lead other students to help you execute your vision. So before we go on, I do just want to be clear that even though I find that impact projects are distinct from community service activities, that does not mean that I think that community service is bad or not desirable. Community service is really desirable. And if you feel that you would like to join existing community service activities, that's great. Impact projects just take that one step further. So it's really about standing out amongst your peers when you can kind of start your own activity or organization. Okay, so I did just want to mention that. So another type of impact project, which, I'm not sure whether it really deserves to be called impact project because it's not necessarily making the same kind of impact on others that we've talked about, but it certainly is equally impressive during the college application process, is the role of original research. And when I say original research, I'm not talking about a very short, say, 4-page paper assigned as part of a class where your teacher is leading you through that research. If it's part of a class, it should be pretty significant. And so for me, I think definitely over 10 pages, hopefully closer to 15 or 20 pages. And yes, during high school. And yes, students have done that. Okay. It doesn't matter whether that's on literature or history or science, as long as it's conducted mostly independently. And I have an asterisk there because having a mentor is okay, but having a teacher who's really like feeding you sources, that I don't consider original research. Original research is really when you go out and you create your research question and you go out and you find your sources. If a teacher is instructing you on how to come up with the hypothesis or question, how to find research sources, that's fine. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. Original research is so compelling to undergraduate admissions officers because it can demonstrate intellectual curiosity, persistence, and a student's ability to think and work with originality. And that's why it's such a great opportunity, if you have the opportunity to do research, to try to take advantage of that. Beyond getting into potentially helping you to get into college, because it does highlight those traits, original research that you conduct as an undergrad, as a high school student, may help you to get research opportunities as an undergraduate with a professor at your university, with a graduate student at your university. And those opportunities then can lead to going to med school, as I'll tell you about, of a student of mine, or getting into graduate school later on. So I know it's really scary, maybe if you're a 15 or 16-year-old watching this, to think about, oh my gosh, I can't think about my life 10 years from now. But you may want to do research 10 years from now, and doing it now can be the first step in a long process that helps you to do that. So let's just talk for a moment about where impact projects and or research, where they can be highlighted in the college application process. So where are you going to kind of show off what you've done to college admissions officers? Well, there's several places, right? You definitely can talk about it in the main personal statement. In the Common App, that's the main 650-word statement. But not only there, if you want to talk about something else, you can also talk about it in a supplemental essay. You certainly, if the school grants either alumni interviews or interviews with an admissions officer, you can certainly discuss it during an interview. And it should definitely play a major part in your activities list and the resume that you will submit as a supplemental document in the Common App. But it can also be talked about by others. So if your mentor, for example, if you've got a research mentor, you can ask that person for a supplemental letter of recommendation that can be given as a third letter beyond the two teacher letters for the application package, so to speak. So I'd just like to share with you a couple of more examples of research that I myself have mentored. My student is not in this photo anywhere, but she lived in the town of Mamaroneck in Westchester, New York, and she was very interested in psychology. And she not only organized a tutoring group that tutored kids who lived in the Washingtonville housing projects in lower income housing, but she also actually, we sort of developed a research question based on that tutoring activity. So she was interested in whether tutoring and being paired with a big brother or big sister consistently over a certain amount of weeks would impact an elementary school student's self-esteem. And so she had to measure the young students' self-esteem before the project. She had to get permission from their parents to give them a survey. She had to develop a survey. She had to figure out how surveys are developed in the first place. Then she needed to get the permission of her principal at the high school to start the tutoring group. She had to get the permission of the housing project's a youth coordinator in order to deliver the survey itself. She had to get the other teens to tutor. She had to get the teens to deliver the survey to their tutee or their student, and then compile that data. And oh, by the way, in the middle of all that, COVID struck. So you can see that the skills that my student was able to develop over the course. Now, this, to be fair, this was a 2+ year project. And granted, maybe it lasted a little longer because COVID put a lot of kinks into the work. Nevertheless, she really developed a lot of persistence because she encountered a lot of obstacles along the way, everything from bureaucratic obstacles by school administrators to just logistical kids who didn't show up. And so by the end, she could really talk in an essay quite cogently about her experience conducting original psychological research, and it paid off. This student is now at UCLA, which is a very difficult school for any student to get into, but in particular, students from New York to get into. So I'm really proud of the work that she did, and also proud that I was able to help her. Oops. So, sorry, I kind of went extemporaneously there. Some of this she also, by the way, had to learn how to write a lit review, which could be, if you aren't able to conduct actual psychological research with actual students, even conducting a literature review in any of the social sciences, it would be super impressive. Okay. So another example of research that I've mentored is history research. I am a trained historian. That's what my PhD is in. The doctor in Dr. P is history, is a history PhD. And when I was a teacher at Horace Mann School, I taught one section of AP US history. And on the first day of school, students would freak out because I would give them this little, this quite thick packet, actually, detailing the 15 to 20 page original research paper that they would write. Now, granted, they've never done this before. They were either 11th or 12th graders. And so certainly I mentored them and I kind of taught them how to do it. And this is a particularly small class, but every year I would take them to the New York Public Library research branch, the branch at 42nd Street and Fifth Avenue, where the two lions are in front of, and they would conduct research there. The male student in the second row actually got his paper that he wrote for that class published by a journal called the Concord Review that publishes students' original research. And I actually had three students get their papers published by that. And that was an amazing opportunity that he could then write about on his college application. He wound up getting accepted into Harvard. I'm not saying that he went into finance because of the paper he wrote in my class. He happened to write about the impact of the panic of 1906 on the foundation of the eventual Federal Reserve System, but now he does happen to work in finance. So, you can see, and the next example I'll talk about too, many of the research projects that students do in high school can stay with them. The student who I just mentioned in Mamaroneck, she will be majoring in psychology, and I would not be surprised if she winds up, doing something with children and adolescents in her research at UCLA. This other student was really quite extraordinary as well. She also did a paper wrote a paper that was published by the Concord Review, and hers happened to be on the transition from midwifery in the 18th century to obstetrics in the 20th century, and how the birthing of babies during that transition got changed from women to men. So women were mainly midwives, and then women were kicked out of that profession as that profession got professionalized, and men became obstetrics. And this young woman wound up later on getting a Fulbright scholarship to study obstetrics in Nepal. And she actually said to me, we spoke, she said, I hope you don't mind that I'm studying live people, but I just really like dealing with live people more than dead people, which is what you do when you're a historian, right? And I said, clearly that is fine. And I'm showing you her quote, not just because it makes me look good, not because of that, but because of this part about, sorry, that it asks that research made her ask her own questions. And that's really key if you would like to do research. And also to show that that mindset of asking questions, she realized, pushed her to do an honors thesis at Cornell, where she was accepted and where she eventually wound up to graduate in the top 1%. And it was wonderful because she happened to be able to invite me to her graduation as part of this elite group of students at Cornell. And that's the president of Cornell, and that's me with much longer hair several years ago when she graduated. It was wonderful to kind of be part of these 50 or so teachers from around the country who were invited by these elite students, but also to show you that, you know, she went on to go to Harvard Medical School. So again, she did a paper on doctors, right? She went on to Harvard Medical School and now she's doing her residency. So, you know, she never would have thought at 16 years old where that research would have led her, but now 12 years later, you know, she's starting her residency. So it's really, you know, quite exciting what research can do. Now, clearly, is this all because of me? No, of course not, right? Her parent was a doctor as well. And so, you know, she had so many other teachers, but the research bit is really, I think, very important because it was one thing developing her intellectual curiosity and her skills that helped her on the path to where she eventually wound up. So as promised, I said I would stop at about 40 minutes. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to to attend future webinars by signing up for my newsletter at crimsoncoaching.com. You can also email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com to receive Dr. P's top tips on developing an impact project. If you like Crimson Coaching on Facebook, you'll also get news of when I will be giving upcoming talks. And you can find previous talks that have been recorded at youtube.com/c/Crimson Coaching. And when you're there, if you could please subscribe, that really helps the channel to grow. And it's just a nice way to say thanks for giving me this information, Dr. P. So now's the time when you get to ask questions. I know I threw a lot at you in the past 40 minutes, and I know that sometimes people do need to leave early. So if that is the case, please feel free, do as you need to. I do just want to thank once again you for coming to Orangeburg Public Library for sponsoring the talk, and to Kim Carletta for inviting me. Questions?